All right, welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. This is part 2 of the October 2018 Q&A. I think part 1 was on the channel probably a few days before now, but we've got a whole other selection of questions for this particular video. So yeah, still some interesting things to get to. So I guess we'll get to some more questions.
Let's do it. Okay, next question, and I'm going to get you to address this one because this is a very interesting question.
Okay.
I have some thoughts on it. Why don't we have more than 2 threads per core, and then is it even possible?
Yeah, we were talking about this just before we had started this Q&A because one of the, I think this was the top upvoted question on YouTube.
Yeah,
so it's
an
very
interesting question, yeah.
But so what hyper-threading and SMT is designed to do, the multi-threading type thing, is just to better utilize the CPU resources in the actual physical core that's there.
No waiting around.
Yeah, no waiting around. You're cutting out, that sort of time. Just, every single time there's something ready to go, it's gone. It's done. It's done. So having those 2 threads go into the one physical core helps that out. So when you sort of are thinking about running more threads, where are you getting the advantage from? Where the physical core is still the same. So is it utilizing that core even more, or are you just going to get bottlenecked by just having more things ready to go in line? So yeah, I don't think, is it possible? I'm sure it's possible from a design standpoint to do it. I just don't think that there's much of a reason to do it. We're already sort of utilizing most of the resources there with existing hyperthreading.
Yeah, well, you have to dedicate part of the die area to making another pipe to the CPU. And if that pipe's only gaining you a couple of % more performance, it's not worth the percentage it took to create it.
So what's the current percentage you get, say, hyperthreading versus the...
I would guess around 25% boost in efficiency for that core. And adding a third one, if it was to even provide an advantage and not go backwards, would be only a couple of %, I imagine, because if having just the extra pipe there would do that. So hyperthreading, I haven't thought this through like for a quick analogy, but it's kind of like if Tim's the core and he's doing work and I'm handing him paperwork to do, and then I've got to go get the next bit of paper and Tim's sitting there going, oh, where's this next bit of paper? And there's a few second delay. If there's a second person there giving him the second bit of paper, Tim's always got paper to work on. And then it's like, does Tim benefit from having a third person if he's only getting a small benefit from the second person's only just helping here and there? Adding a third person doesn't really help. It just means there's a third person standing up with a bit of paper more often.
Yeah, potentially makes it more complex.
More complex, and then it might be that if there's another Tim, another core, then that ends up having to go back to him or it's thrown away and then reissued, and it just creates a whole mess.
Yeah, and I guess with these sort of things, you have to think, it seems like a fairly obvious thing that a designer could do is add an extra thread to get more performance, but the fact that neither AMD nor Intel has shown any inclination of going to 3 threads should sort of tell you that it's probably not right now going to give you that sort of performance advantage.
Yeah, I think the fact that an extra pipe doesn't boost performance by 100% is probably the reason why there's not a third one. I think that's probably the simplest way of going about that one.
Okay, another question from our Discord chat from Nick. Certain hardware rumors are easy to tell a mile off that they are fake. Others seem reasonable and may be true, but sometimes turn out not to be true. How have you two determined in the past what is actually real and what's not? I'm thinking like in scenarios where you guys have been spot on, but many others have been taken in by what seemed to be a believable rumor. Oh, yeah,
So I was just going to interrupt there. It's a bit of a joke for the Patreon members. DirectX 13 is a bit of a giveaway.
Yeah, that sort of stuff. I mean, I guess sometimes we do sort of get information that's not made public, which makes it a bit easier to sort of figure out what's going on, especially if there's like an upcoming product launch and, we haven't been... let's say a product's coming out in like a couple of weeks and we haven't heard about it. It's pretty unlikely that whatever that product was being rumored is a legit product at that point, especially if they're getting into detailed specifications and performance. Then it's usually, not true. But a lot of the time, it's pretty hard to tell. But it's just, I guess you have to say like common sense. Like there's might be a little tell in it that's, doesn't seem right. Like, so take a GPU, for example. It might have a reasonable sounding TDP and core count, but then the clock speeds are like much higher than we know that process technology to be able to do. So There's stuff like that.
I think you nailed it with the start. The RTX series is a perfect example. We heard some things that were later released, and we're not going to say, oh, we knew that, because people are like, oh, yeah, sure you did. Because we don't do rumors, and we just wait for the official stuff, because we're more focused on showing you results. That we're not a news channel, and you do your roundup once a week, but that's
all we really want to do.
That's all we really want to do. So that's as much news as Tim can handle in a week. But the RTX launch is a perfect example. We were seeing leaks for months since the start of the year.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It was coming next month. It's coming next month. And there was all these details. And Tim and I are sitting there going, well, we've heard of no event.
Yeah.
We've heard nothing. And then the way it did go down was we were invited to an event in the US more than a month before it was going to hit shelves. So we would have known 5-6 weeks. Well, we were invited to that event weeks in advance.
Yeah.
So it was at least 6 weeks we knew when it was happening. And then it was a month after when we thought it was going to be happening again. So it was even longer than that.
Yeah.
So anyway, the way it works, we have a pretty good idea of what's happening when. So we know of some events that are happening now that are scheduled for AMD. And yeah, can't say much more than that. But we sort of know what is possibly coming and when.
Yeah, that's basically how it happens. All right, Steve, if you were buying a new PC primarily for gaming, is there any reason to get a 9700K or 9900K? But given the price of this one, I think it's definitely a no anyhow. Over an 8700K to be future-proofed for the next 3 to 5 years. So is there any reason to get a 9700K over an 8700K for the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, based on the preliminary testing that we did for our day one coverage, I would say no. The way it works is, with the hyperthreading, in terms of CPU resources, you could argue that the 8700K would act, like a 9-core?
Yeah, sort of.
I mean, yeah, it's a rough... at worst case, you would say they'd be similar. It's kind of like you've got your quad cores, like your 7700K, your 6700K with hyperthreading, and they still stack up really well today. So I don't think there'll be... In 5 years, when both CPUs are maxed out, I don't think you'll see any difference between the differences that you see today. The 9700K is generally faster because it's clocked higher, and not having hyperthreading can be beneficial for some games. I don't think it's worth... Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one,
At the higher price at the moment, it's...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only about $40 or $50 more for the 9700K.
Yeah.
The 9900K is well out of the question because that makes no sense in terms of value. Yeah, it really comes down to price. If you could get the 9700K for the same price as the 8700K, then maybe. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's really it's hard to say. The 9700K has a few advantages. The soldered chip means that it should run a bit cooler. But yeah, like if you can get it with a similar price, then sure, get the 9700K. But otherwise, it's kind of a pointless CPU. At least that's how it seems right now.
Okay, another good question from Nick here. For games right now and for the near future, is there any reason to go beyond 8 cores like our current highest end mainstream CPUs from AMD and Intel? Obviously, if you're a content creator, the more cores the better, but as a gamer first, I'm not sure I'd be necessarily benefiting from a theoretical 12-core Zen 2 CPU.
Yeah, that's a fair assumption.
Yep.
We've done a lot of 6-core versus 8-core now. Both of the CPUs had SMT technology. So that's either AMD's SMT implementation or hyperthreading for Intel. So if it has SMT, 6-core processor, perfectly fine. As I said in an earlier question, even your quad cores with an SMT technology is fine. Not a problem. We haven't seen much difference between the 6 and 8s. 8s are starting to pull away a little bit now because 8 logical cores are starting to get utilized quite well in the latest and greatest games. But from 8 to 12 for gaming, it's going to be many years before.
Yeah, and again, I think we've mentioned this a few times with these sort of theoretical what's happening in the future type questions. A lot of what's needed for gaming is really dictated by the game consoles, your PS4 and your Xbox. So right now, where those consoles have such limited CPU power, it's not necessarily going to be required to have even more cores. Whereas theoretically, let's say, maybe a PS5 would have a 12-core Zen 2 CPU, then you'll get that leap when developers are suddenly utilizing more CPU resources.
That's true. You'll get the leap where it scales across all the cores well. But then if you have a quad core that's clocked twice as high, that's still going to work okay. Especially if you have half as many cores, a 6-core, for example. And if the 6 cores clock twice as aggressively as the 12-core on the console, that will work just fine. So it's still about the frequency. Megahertz still matter.
Okay, another Discord question. Will thermals of a CPU kill a motherboard faster? I believe a downdraft ITX cooler will hotbox an ITX system. So
okay. Yes and no, I suppose. It's a tough one to... It depends how hot the CPU is, because obviously on especially a mini ITX board, an example you give, having any airflow is beneficial, generally speaking. So I would say, it's a bit of a yes and no situation. It depends. I think it's probably no for the most part.
Yeah.
What would... The crow's having a go again. What would probably be more of a problem there is just the components themselves. So, or the CPU itself. So if the CPU is drawing a lot of current and that's stressing the components and that's making them work near maximum capacity, which is well above their optimal efficiency level, that's probably going to kill the motherboard faster than anything.
Yeah, definitely. So. Okay, Steve, this one is for you, I reckon.
For me.
How much of a performance boost can we expect from DDR5 in gaming and content creation? And I will preface this by saying we're expecting about 80% higher bandwidth.
Yeah,
currently looking at
keeping that in mind, that doesn't actually change my answer.
Yep.
There's always a bit of an expectation when new memory technologies come in that they're just going to, huge step forward, and it's a lot better. It's certainly going to help. If you were to put DDR5 memory on a Coffee Lake CPU, like your 8700K, the performance benefit will be virtually zero. So we've seen this before in the past slot when going from DDR2 to DDR3 and DDR3 to DDR4. The initial step on the existing platforms is pretty much the same for a couple of reasons. First of all, so if you're getting 80% bandwidth boost straight off the bat, that's good. That's more than what we've seen in the past, because in the past it's been pretty much parity. Started and it's just carried on from existing points.
Yeah, it's supposed to have better bandwidth at the same speeds. DDR5.
That's exceptional. But in any case, that will only provide a performance benefit with current processors, assuming that they could support DDR5, which there's no evidence that they can. But if they could, you're not going to see a performance uplift because they're not memory bandwidth limited, because you can get DDR4 4000 and something, and the performance uplift in most things is like that. It's not huge. I mean, it can scale quite well in some stuff. But for future processors that are designed to take advantage of more bandwidth with more cores and faster cores and things like that, then it'll enable the newer CPUs to take that step forward, which they couldn't necessarily do with the slower memory technology. Much like what DDR6 has done for the RTX cards. They've been able to, in that sense, they've just sacrificed the memory bus.
Yeah.
Because they've been able to compensate with faster memory. But I'm interested to see what it offers, but I wouldn't expect any huge leap enabled just because of the memory. It'll be what the memory enables the newer platforms to do. Okay, this question, it will be interesting for Australian viewers and those of you, international viewers who are interested in the Australian market. Anyway, I'll get to the question. Why are Australian PC parts so inflated, especially for graphics cards and CPUs? I understand conversion rates, but goddamn, an RTX 2080 and 8700K is literally 2K. So, basically in Australia, what he's saying there is what it works out to be in US dollars. You do a straight conversion, and there's a significant percentage increase over that for us Aussie shoppers for a lot of things. They call it Australia tax, similar to the, I suppose, Apple tax.
Yeah, and Europe, I guess Europe also faces a similar issue. So, we did speak to one of the sort of retailers that gave us a bit of an insight into this. And I guess one of the things that they mentioned was that America and Australia have different distribution networks. So here, a lot of things are done through distributors, whereas in the US, it might be done directly with the vendor, which, of course, you add in a distributor, they have to take a cut. So that increases the end pricing.
So they're cutting the middleman out.
There's a few other things. Some people doing the direct conversion don't factor in our added sales tax. I've seen that's a fairly common mistake to make. On top of that, we have different consumer law here, different warranties. So often the overheads for supporting those different things can increase the cost.
Cost of doing business is a bit higher, yeah.
I think as well, one of the big things that people or companies add in is just the willingness to buy, or your purchasing power sort of factor, which I guess companies figure that Australians have more purchasing power. They have more disposable income or something. So they figure that, we are more willing to spend more than the direct conversion. So because we're more willing to spend more, they can price it higher. And we very often see that with games.
I was going to say,
super happens with games.
You'll see a lot of the game sites that sell keys across multiple. You'll see like, I don't know, Russia, I think, is one that's often very cheap compared to Australia.
Yeah, because they have a lot lower willingness to buy. And so, yeah, obviously that's exactly the same product. That costs them literally the same for distribution. So that's one of those things where you see that purchasing power argument come into play.
Yeah, it's very dodgy, but that's just how the world works.
But yeah, basically this retailer is also saying that, if they're working directly with the brand, it's pretty easy for them to match US regular retail price plus GST to Australian dollars. So yeah, it does depend. I think there's a final issue that we're sort of seeing a little bit is when we gain the sort of stock related issues, like Intel struggling to produce 9900Ks or companies struggling to produce enough chips, that they tend to prioritize the US as a market.
Yeah.
So
we get the scraps.
Yeah, here we get some issues with 9900Ks being even less available than they are in the US, which pushes prices higher. So yeah, we get so many issues pretty much.
Yeah, supply and demand hits us a bit harder.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Is 4K resolution worth it on a 27-inch screen? Is high frame rate or high resolution the most important for casual gamer? In my opinion, it really depends on the gamer and the game you're playing. 4K at 27-inch is the minimum I would go. I've got a 4K 27-inch screen for testing, and it's noticeably better than the 1440p version I have, if you're looking just for sharpness and all that. So you can definitely see the difference, in my opinion. But personally, I would prefer the 1440p screen for the higher frame rates if I'm playing FPS games and stuff like that. But anyway, this is sort of a Tim question.
Yeah, I think, it's nice that we tend to play different games. I mean, I like my shoes, but I do play a lot of your sort of role-playing games, action-adventure games where the high frame rate isn't as important for a competitive advantage. And I still find that, if my choice is between running at 4K at a lower frame rate or 1440p at a higher frame rate, I will always choose 1440p at a higher frame rate because the quality increase, especially in like things where there's no text or you're not really needing that super fine detail. It's going to be more can I run it at ultra compared to high, or can I run it at a higher frame rate? Those things give a much bigger improvement to the experience and the quality of the game, as opposed to just switching from 1440 to 4K. But if you were telling me which one would I prefer for reading a book or something, or reading websites, the crispness of text at 4K is like massive.
I think you've said it in the past, and I agree that 1440p, especially for a 27-inch screen, is the sweet spot. Because on a 27-inch screen, the difference between 1080p and 1440p for gaming is massive.
Yeah.
Massive.
It is a lot sharper.
Yeah, way different. Whereas from 1440p to 4K, it's like, it's in my opinion, you can definitely tell the difference, but it's like, that's better.
Yeah, it's a bit sharper, it's looking a bit nicer.
Bit nicer, but yeah, from 1080p to 1440p, it's like, whoa, okay, this is a totally different ball game.
But then if you're talking about like 60 FPS versus 100 FPS, or even worse, like 30 versus like 60, then, it's going to be like way bigger difference than just the resolution difference.
So yeah, it comes down to personal preference and the games you're playing. I think it's probably that simple.
All right, next question. The latest i9-9900K flagship CPU seems to be pushing the boundaries of thermals with even minor overclocks. From a pure performance standpoint, does Intel have any meaningful way to release a superior non-HEDT chip before the 10nm transition?
No,
they don't.
No,
they're done.
They're in a really, really tough position.
At this point, they have to get 10nm out to go further.
They have to. They're stuck. So the 9900K really is pushing to and arguably beyond boundaries, which is why we're seeing all these problems with motherboards and cooling and whatnot. It's really why Intel's been such a mess this year. We're used to seeing Intel release stuff, it's done, it all goes fairly well, and then we've seen the Kaby Lake was axed very quickly, wasn't it?
Yep.
Coffee Lake came out of nowhere and offered 6 cores to compete with Ryzen, so we got that. And then that started off, and then they realized they had to get an 8-core on that platform, and a lot of the boards wouldn't support that kind of power delivery. So they released the Z390 chipset to signify that the Z390 boards can support, they're ready for the 8 cores, they're intended for the 8 cores, and they will work. And we still have this huge issue with some boards limiting power because they don't want to kill themselves over a relatively short period of time. So, yeah, the answer's no, really.
Yep.
Even for the high-end desktop platforms, where they're not going anywhere with that either.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So
they're a bit stuck on both fronts. So yeah, they need 10 nanometer to come.
Next year could be pretty brutal for Intel. If this year wasn't already, they've had the year from hell. The security stuff alone was brutal for them, but
yep, it's been rough for Intel.
Yeah, it's been a really rough year. I don't think they've ever seen a year like this before in the company's history. I mean, they're still selling CPUs quite well. Probably not towards the end of the year, but they were earlier on. But yeah, next year's going to be very interesting. That is for sure. Okay, will AMD ever catch up to Intel in instructions per clock, often referred to as IPC, a single core, so that's sort of the same thing, or will they always play second fiddle because with upcoming 7nm CPU they have a lot of headroom, i.e. double that of, and then I can't
double that of Intel.
Okay, I had little Word document.
Yeah, it's blocked off.
Yeah, so that butchered the end of my question, or reading the question out there.
Yeah, I mean, will they catch up to the instructions per clock? I mean, that's on their architecture design team. That they're just not going to make much of a difference with 7nm because they'll just be able to allow them to clock higher and put more
yes and no.
In
so
the
IPC relies on a lot of things.
Yeah,
people seem to think it's just to do with it's the core. So it's the things around the core as well. Yep. So IPC changes dramatically when you tighten up memory timings with Ryzen. And the latency improvements that they made with second-gen Ryzen certainly attributed to improved IPC.
Yep.
So if the next gen goes to what we were talking about before, DDR5, and that makes huge bandwidth improvements, possibly latency timing improvements, add all that stuff together, and they may very well overtake. They're not that far. If you tune up the memory now for both platforms, AMD and Intel, and obviously compare them at the same core count and clock speed, for productivity, Intel has we're talking very low single digit percentage gain. Gaming that's very latency sensitive, it comes up to 10%. So you sort of get into low double digits.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, 7nm will give AMD an advantage in that they won't be as limited by clock speed anymore relative to Intel. That's the big one. They're behind on IPC and clock speed at the moment.
Double whammy.
You get the double whammy. That's why they've gone with more cores. When they move to 7nm, they'll be able to, hopefully, and it seems like all the things that TSMC are saying suggest they will, be able to push up those frequencies closer to what Intel is already achieving with Intel's own 14nm. And then, as you were saying, it's kind of the rest of the stuff that needs to go into them improving IPC. So that's not necessarily as related to 7nm tech. So what they do with AVX instructions in particular, can they improve their efficiency there? Will help them out with some productivity workloads again.
Well, I think
cache latency.
All that sort of stuff will be helped by the node shrink as well, because they can dedicate a bit more resources to fattening those things up. But anyway, we'll see before too long. I mean, we're not claiming anything. Who knows? Could be terrible, could be amazing, could be anything. But we are expecting pretty good things. All right, I'll read this one out because I have no idea how I'm going to answer it. Most anticipated PC games for 2019. Haven't even thought about 2019. I'm still trying to get through all the day one reviews of this month, let alone we've got a few games. I think
still to come.
Yeah, we've got Fallout next week.
Yeah, Fallout, and there's Hitman and Just Cause, I think, towards the later end of the year, and Battlefield 5 as well.
That's a lot of 50 GPU benchmarks for me to do.
Have fun. Yeah. That's for 2019. Oh, what do you reckon? I mean...
Metro's out next year, isn't it?
Yeah, that's probably the main one, because I really enjoyed, not just because of the new technology that was used in the game, but the game itself.
Probably won't be in the game when it comes out, let's be honest.
Yeah.
If we haven't got ray tracing sorted out by then.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff doesn't get announced until the year of these days.
That's true.
It's hard to know. I mean, I'm not as bullish on Anthem. I know that's like a big game that people are really anticipating.
That's early next year as well. Yeah.
I think maybe they pushed it out to the end of next year, but certainly
I thought it was early.
Certainly, I think it was holiday. I'm not. Don't quote me on that, but I'm certainly not as excited about that. It seems more in line with Destiny, which is a game I didn't really get into all that much.
Yeah.
So, and EA's games tend to be a little disappointing lately when they've been released. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's hard to know without a full slate of what's to come, but certainly Metro for sure. And then
PC gaming's got to the point now where you take it on a per game basis as it's released and you get to check it out.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because getting hyped up and excited for a game is no longer a good strategy.
Yeah.
So we'll just check the games out as they come next year, benchmark the hell out of them, and Tim will do some optimizations and give you his impression of the game.
Okay, this is a question that I see come up sometimes, so I've included it in here. So this person asks, hi, being a fan of Witcher 3, does RTX cards improve or enhance the visual quality in this title, especially during sunset and sunrise scenes? So simple answer to that is no. Buying a new GPU or GPU architecture, switching from AMD to NVIDIA or anything like that has no impact on the visual quality. The quality settings are just set in the game. You can either run them or you can't. Running a new GPU doesn't unlock like a new tier of quality. It still looks the same.
Yeah, that is assuming you're not coming from a card that couldn't run it on ultra.
That's the only reason why you might see.
So I suppose that's the confusion with that question. So people get excited for a new GPU to go back and play an older game because now they can play it at a higher quality setting, higher resolution, so it's nicer and sharper and all that.
But for example, Ultra on a Pascal card and Ultra on a Turing card are both going to look exactly the same.
Yep.
Running at a higher frame rate, in my opinion, does deliver better visual quality. It's smoother, it's nicer to play, and it just looks clearer and sharper when you're playing at a higher frame rate. But aside from that,
the visual
fidelity, the effects and everything is the same. All right, so that is all the questions that we've done for October in 2018. Seems like we only did the September one like just last week, but I guess this was actually a whole month in the end.
Yeah, so. I think it was late last. Well, yeah, I don't know. I lose track. I think
it's just been really busy.
Yeah, it's because of all the launches: the RTX 2070, the Core i9, Threadripper. Actually, that's still coming up. The 12 and 24 core.
Yeah, so pretty crazy. Lots of stuff. So yeah, we've been keeping ourselves busy. So hopefully you guys have all subscribed to catch all that content. But if you haven't, definitely do that. And give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. And I guess we'll see you in the very next one.